Welcome to Dispute Resolutions, delivered with Robert Berliner.
Hey everybody, welcome to an all-new episode of Dispute Resolutions, delivered with Robert Berliner, where we take you inside the art and strategy of successful mediation. I'm your host, Mike Leon. You know, Robert here is a professional mediator. He's got arbitrator. He's a former transactional attorney with more than 40 years of legal and negotiation experience. And in today's episode, we're going to explore Bob's journey from lawyer to mediator, why he believes mediation is fundamentally about making deals, and how his people-first mindset helps build trust and when it matters the most. So, Bob, good to see you first and foremost. Let's start at the beginning here. What led you to transition from practicing law to focusing full-time on mediation and arbitration work?
Thanks, Mike, for having me on here. It just came to a point in my life where I felt it was time for a change. I'd been a transactions lawyer for many years, representing people in all kinds of businesses, particularly in the real estate industry, but also people in closely held businesses. And the real estate market, and I'd also been a developer and investor in some real estate projects. And it became, the real estate market was then in the doldrums, and it really seemed to me it was time for a change. The people who would have been my clients, my contemporaries, had either sold their business, left their business, turned it over to their kids, and their kids didn't want a lawyer their dad's age. So I just thought it was time for a change. And someone suggested to me that I should try mediation. I'd probably be good at it. And so I said, what have I got to lose? I thought it was also an opportunity to help people solve problems, which is what I like to do as a lawyer. So I took the class and got a certificate, and I was a mediator. And then at the same time, I felt that if I'm mediation, maybe I should become an arbitrator too. They're both forms of alternative dispute resolution, which was my interest. And so I became a panelist, both arbitration and mediation panelist with the American Arbitration Association. And what I do is also, I do some work as an expert witness in cases involving legal malpractice or real estate or legal malpractice in the real estate world. And I also do a little bit of work of transactional nature for old friends who ask me to help them out. But what I spend most of my time doing is mediation arbitration. I find it very satisfying, very rewarding, and I think I'm pretty good at it.
Well, you know, you just mentioned kind of your work in transactional law, how you still do some of that. You know, most mediators, if you think about it, they come from like either litigation or they are served on the bench. How has your work in transactional law kind of shaped your view of what mediation really is, which is conflict resolution?
Well, litigation is by definition an adversarial process. And the litigators are warriors, and that's what a good litigator is, a good warrior. And I litigated some cases early in my career, reasonably successfully, but I transitioned pretty early on to becoming a transactions guy. And a transactions lawyer is a different function from a litigator. Your job as a transaction lawyer is to help people come to an agreement to do a transaction that both parties ultimately really want to do. Somebody wants to buy, somebody else wants to sell. Somebody wants to borrow, somebody else wants to loan. And so the lawyer's job in that situation is to help bring those people together, assuming it's possible. And that colors my view of conflict resolution. I'm not there to watch them or to help them argue about who's going to win and who's going to lose, or to figure out who's the winner. I don't even want to bother with that generally. The job is to help them reach an agreement so the matter is put behind them. And the parties control the outcome. I don't. And I use my transaction experience to get to the part, what really motivates the parties, what their real interests are, where they can compromise, and how they can get a deal done. And that's the name of the game.
That is the name of the game. And let's follow up on that, because it's a form of deal making, in terms of mediation, right? So I would love for you to kind of take our audience a little bit inside of like what makes your approach different from others. How do you benefit the parties in the room? You kind of touched on a high level there, and you talked a little bit about how sometimes mediators are former litigators in litigation and the process. But what makes your approach different from other folks, and how do you benefit the parties in the room? Go a little bit deeper into that.
Well, I don't know what other people do, to be honest. I mean, I'm not a former litigator, and I agree with you, most mediators are. So, but my approach is to deal with it and I do not do personal injury mediation, or really, I haven't done much divorce and really don't hold myself out at that. Most of what I mediate are business cases involving within a business or cases involving disputes between businesses. And so I bring to that the skills of a business and the attitude of a business lawyer. My job is to help people make a business deal, which means, okay, what do you have to give up to get what you need to be satisfied? How do you compromise? And ultimately it sometimes comes down to price. Where do you compromise to get to a resolution? I don't know that litigators don't do that, but I know that's what I do.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about not only the approach, but in terms of mediation, you've got to come off almost as relatable, human. You've got to understand the party's needs. Can you talk a little bit about how that shows up in your work when you are handling these forms of mediation?
Oh, being relatable, credible, human is the essence of what it takes to be a successful mediator. People come to you in conflict, and you need, as a mediator, you need to be relatable and persuadable in order to get them to understand what's really at stake. A judge, for example, has symbolic and actual authority over the process and the outcome. My job as a mediator, I'm not a decision maker. The parties control those decisions. And what I have to offer is my credibility and my relatability. And I do establish that as particular by meeting with the parties and their counsel separately before we ever get together in what people call the mediation conference, which is what a lot of people just think of as the mediation. So I insist that usually we do it on Zoom. I insist that we get together, we talk. I talk about the dispute. We talk about about what's at issue, what the personalities involved are, and we also talk about things that have nothing to do with the dispute. We can talk about family. We can talk about sports. We can talk about, I suppose, the weather. But we always talk about something that establishes that relationship, makes me a person of credibility and really empathy for both parties. And that's what it takes to get a business deal, a business mediation done. I often insist, especially if it's an internal dispute about a business, that I get a tour of the business. And it's, again, a way of establishing that relationship, establishing credibility, establishing the human touch that makes it possible to be a force for peace. And that's really ultimately what these people want. That's why they come to me. They want to put the dispute behind them. They want me to help them resolve it in a way that meets their needs. And I tell them it takes compromise, but that's what it takes.
That's what it takes. Bob, you've talked a little bit about what makes someone effective in this role. I want to take the opposite viewpoint here. Somebody's listening to this. Common misconception about what a mediator actually does. What are some of those common misconceptions?
Well, I think often, especially if they've never experienced mediation, and sometimes lawyers can be helpful and usually are, but even then people don't quite get it. So often people think that the mediator is really just another person who's going to tell them what to do. Here's your case. Here's what you're going to do. And that's what my meetings are in advance are intended to dissuade them of. I want to make sure that they understand that the mediation is a more satisfying way of resolving their disputes because they control it. They don't have to say yes. They can say no, or they can say yes, but. And it's more flexible. It's more party controlled. And the sooner the people realize that that's the process and what my role is, the more effective I'll be. That's why I have those pre-mediation conference meetings with each side, because I can explain that all to them. And I think by going through the process, talking at length with them about things that interest them, they'll get that that's my role and they'll be satisfied with that.
Bob, earlier you were telling me a little bit about some of the mediation like you stay away from. I know you work a little bit in the small claims and eviction mediation programs. Can you tell us a little bit how that came about and what impact that's had?
Sure. It's amazing. It started, if you can believe it, 15 years ago. I had just finished the class at DePaul University here in Chicago to get my mediation certificate, which said, "Oh, Bob, you're a mediator now." So now that I'm a mediator, I actually was having lunch with a lawyer, a partner at a big law firm with an office here in Chicago, a lawyer that I've known for many, many years. And I said, "Hey, I'm a mediator now. Why don't you send me some cases?" And he says to me, "Have you ever done it before?" And I had to say, "Well, no, not exactly." And he said, "Well, don't you think you should?" And I said, "Well, sure." So the way you get experience if you have never done something is you offer to do it for free. So I tried to get some mediation experience here in Chicago and Cook County, and it didn't. Those efforts really didn't get anywhere. And so I called a fellow I knew through a family connection, who was a judge in Will County, one of our suburban Chicago counties. And I told him what I wanted to do. He said, "I'll put you in touch with a couple of judges." And one thing led to another. And finally, one of the judges took me over to the small claims and eviction courtroom. There's only one judge who handles all those cases in Will County, and said, "Here's a mediator for you." And the judge said, "Glad to have him." So I would go out there once a week and mediate cases. And I always got cases, 1, 2, 3, depended. And I settled almost all of them. I was very, very fortunate in that regard. And so at one point I mediated a case with a Chicago lawyer. It was an eviction case. We settled a case. And when we stepped up to the judge, we presented the agreed order, or the lawyer presented it really, the agreed order that the parties had signed. The judge looked at him and he said, "How'd Mr. Berliner do?" And the lawyer said, "Oh, he was great." The judge said, "Oh yeah, he's a genius." And so shortly thereafter, I went to the judge and I said, "Judge, how'd you like it if I could get other mediators to come out here when the genius can't be here to mediate cases that you would send to them?" And he said, "Great." So I started recruiting mediators from our chapter, the Illinois chapter of the Association of Attorney Mediators. And very soon we had mediators in that courtroom almost every day that the court was in session. And that has continued really to this day. Although we've had a little fall off as a result of COVID when the courts were closed, and then the availability of online mediation, which has dissuaded a few people from making the trip. But generally, we've had people there virtually every day. And I run the program. The judge looks to me to be the leader. I recruit mediators. I do some of the scheduling. And during COVID, with the time of rental assistance available, I negotiated with Will County to pay our mediators a modest fee for mediating a residential eviction. And that has continued to this day. And I I submit the bills, I gather, submit the bills to the county, collect the money, and pay the mediators their fee. And the program is enormously successful. We settle about 85% of the cases that are referred to us. The judges over all these years have had nothing but the highest of compliments of our program. And for me, it's become a passion. What started as simply a way to get some experience has become something that I'm very devoted to and very passionate about. And I'm proud of what we've contributed to the community. When we mediate cases and get them settled, or even if we don't, people are so grateful. They're so intimidated by the court process because most of them have never been there before. And we make them reasonably comfortable, and we usually come to a conclusion that gets the problem behind them, and they can go home and be done with it. And that's enormously rewarding. So it's become a passion for me.
You know, Bob, I appreciate you sharing those stories. And to land a plane here for everyone listening out there, I would love for you to share another story. It could be from that program or the private case, something that you feel the audience can take away and say, boy, that really illustrated his style, why I should use him as a mediator. Do you have any specific examples you can give off the top of your head?
Yes, Mike. And thanks for bringing me on to do this. I appreciate it. Yes, I do have one. In particular that I can remember. It was a Joliet case. It was a dispute between a fellow and his ex-girlfriend. The fellow was a successful entrepreneur. I don't know his age, but he was definitely older. The ex-girlfriend was much younger woman, and he had broken up with her, and she wanted clearly what I would call revenge, to make him regret having broken up the relationship, and he didn't want to pay any money to her. And I'm not sure what the money was about, but she was asserting a claim for some money. And we were there. Most of my cases in Joliet, I resolve in an hour and a half, one way or the other. We started probably this case 9:30. I was still there at 2:00 with these people. So I don't think I've ever been as long on a case in Joliet before or since that case. So after the 4 or 5 hours was up, and I've been with these people for a long time, going back and forth, I must have built some credibility with this fellow. Because when we were alone in a conference room, he says to me, "What do you think of all this?" And paraphrasing, I said, "I don't think you did your thinking with the right part of your brain." And I was used a little more colorful language than that. And he said, "You're right." And the case was settled in 20 minutes. So that's my story.
See, he was not thinking with the right side of his brain. Bob, we truly appreciate the stories, the insights, learning more about your background today. Can't thank you enough for hopping on the program.
Thank you again, Mike. I really appreciate it.
And thank you to everybody for listening to an all-new episode of Dispute Resolutions Delivered. You heard Bob's experience as a transactional attorney. It gives him a unique edge when he's helping people reach resolution. Do me a favor, BerlinerGroup.com. If you want to schedule a consultation or connect with Bob, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave us a review. As always, I'm Mike Leon. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.